After a quick call with my aunt, she forgot to hang up and I heard her trash talking me to my family. He thinks paying our mortgage makes him important. They laughed. I didn't respond until mortgage day came. I, 32M, never thought a simple phone call would unravel 20 years of family relationships. But here we are. 3 months ago, I made what I thought was a routine call to my aunt about my cousin's birthday party arrangements. Little did I know, that call would expose the ugly truth about how my extended family really saw me. My aunt had called me earlier that day asking about bringing food to the party. I told her I'd handle the catering since I usually covered these kinds of expenses anyway. After we wrapped up the details, I thought she'd hung up, but apparently the call was still connected on her end. What I heard next changed everything. My aunt's voice came through crystal clear as she spoke to someone else in the room. She told them I was being my usual controlling self, insisting on paying for everything just to feel important. Then I heard my uncle's voice join in, saying I acted like some big shot just because I helped them out financially sometimes. But the part that really got to me was when my cousin chimed in, mimicking my voice and saying I probably kept a spreadsheet of every dollar I spend on them, like some kind of accountant keeping tabs. They all burst into laughter. My aunt made a comment about how I thought paying their mortgage made me the head of the family or something. My uncle added that I was probably just lonely and trying to buy their affection. The conversation went on for about 10 more minutes, with them dissecting every generous gesture I'd made over the years, turning each one into evidence of my supposed need for control and validation. I sat there in my car, phone pressed to my ear, listening to people I'd considered my closest family members tear me apart. These were the same people who'd been calling me their savior just months earlier when they were facing foreclosure. The same people who'd hugged me and thanked me profusely when I'd offered to help with their mortgage payments. See, about 2 years ago, my uncle had lost his job due to company downsizing. My aunt worked part-time at a local clinic, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover their expenses. They had 3 kids, including my cousin who was in college. When they called me in tears, explaining they might lose the house they'd lived in for 15 years, I didn't hesitate to step in. I'd been fortunate in my career. After college, I'd landed a job at a tech startup that eventually went public. I'd made some smart investments and lived modestly, so I had the means to help. I offered to cover their mortgage payments until my uncle found steady work again. It seemed like the right thing to do. They were family, and family helps family. But listening to them mock me that day, I realized they saw my help as weakness rather than generosity. They thought I was some pathetic guy trying to buy importance in their lives. The worst part was realizing this probably wasn't the first time they'd had conversations like this about me. I finally hung up and drove home in a daze. That evening, I pulled out all the documentation related to their mortgage payments. Over the past 2 years, I'd paid nearly $47,000 toward their mortgage. I'd also covered my cousin's textbooks, helped with car repairs, and picked up the tab for numerous family dinners and events. I spent the next few days processing what I'd heard. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, but I decided to take a different approach. I wanted to see how they'd behave around me now that I knew their true feelings. Would they continue the charade of gratitude while secretly mocking me behind my back? The answer came at my cousin's birthday party the following weekend. Everyone was extra nice to me, thanking me for the catering, complimenting my choice of restaurant. My aunt made a big show of introducing me to some neighbors as her generous nephew, who always took such good care of the family. My uncle patted my back and told everyone how lucky they were to have me. It was all performance. Every smile, every thank you, every compliment felt hollow knowing what they really thought of me. I played along that day, but I was already forming a plan. Over the next 2 months, I continued making their mortgage payments as usual. I didn't want to tip them off that anything had changed. During this time, I started documenting everything. I gathered all the bank statements, transfer receipts, and text messages related to the financial help I provided. I also started recording our phone conversations, which is legal in my state as long as one party consents. I was particularly interested in capturing more of their genuine feelings about me. It didn't take long. During one of our regular check-in calls, my aunt forgot to hang up again. This time, she was talking to a neighbor, explaining how I was basically their personal ATM machine. She laughed about how I never questioned any of their expenses and said I was probably just happy to have people who pretended to care about me. That recording was the final piece I needed. The mortgage payment was due on the 15th of each month. I typically transferred the money a few days early to ensure it posted on time. This month, however, I decided to let the due date pass without making the payment. My uncle called me on the 16th, asking if I'd forgotten about the mortgage. I told him I'd been busy with work, but would handle it soon. He seemed satisfied with that answer. 3 days later, my aunt called with a more urgent tone, reminding me that late fees would kick in soon. I gave her the same response about being swamped at work. By the 25th, they were panicking. My uncle called twice that day, and my aunt sent several text messages. They were trying to maintain their usual friendly tone, but I could sense the desperation creeping in. I continued to reassure them that I'd take care of it, just needed to sort out some banking issues. On the 30th, they received a notice from the mortgage company about the missed payment. My cousin called me directly for the first time in months, asking what was going on. I told him I was having some temporary cash flow problems, but should have everything sorted out soon. The truth was, I had already consulted with a lawyer to ensure I wasn't legally obligated to continue the payments. Since there was no formal agreement, I was under no obligation to keep funding their mortgage. I was simply choosing to stop my voluntary financial assistance. By the middle of the following month, with 2 missed payments now on record, the real conversation started. My uncle called me, and this time there was no pretense of casual family chat. He demanded to know when I was going to make the payments, saying they were facing serious consequences. I told him I'd been reevaluating my financial commitments and wasn't sure I could continue helping with the mortgage. The response was immediate and telling. He went from demanding to pleading within the same conversation. He reminded me of everything they meant to me, how they'd always been there for me, how much they appreciated everything I'd done. It was fascinating to hear him try to reconstruct the narrative of our relationship in real time. My aunt called the next day with a different approach. She tried guilt, reminding me of how my uncle had helped me move when I first got my apartment years ago, how they'd invited me to every family gathering, how they considered me more like a son than a nephew. She painted a picture of reciprocal family support that was completely at odds with what I'd heard them say about me. But I wasn't done yet. I had planned one final revelation. Update 1. I decided to attend their emergency family meeting. My aunt had called everyone together to discuss their financial crisis. The whole extended family was there, grandparents, other aunts and uncles, several cousins. They presented the situation as if I had suddenly and inexplicably abandoned them in their time of need. My uncle stood up and gave this whole speech about how disappointed he was in me, how family was supposed to stick together through thick and thin. He talked about the values our grandparents had instilled in us, and how I was turning my back on those values. Several family members nodded along, clearly buying into this version of events. My aunt added her own commentary about how they'd never asked me to help with the mortgage in the first place, that I had insisted on taking on that responsibility. She made it sound like I had forced this arrangement on them, and was now cruelly pulling the rug out from under their feet. Then my cousin spoke up, talking about how confused and hurt he was by my actions. He said he'd always looked up to me and couldn't understand why I was doing this to his family. The whole room was looking at me with a mixture of disappointment and accusation. I let them finish their presentations. Then I pulled out my phone. I told them I had something interesting to share with everyone. I played the recording from the original phone call where I'd heard them mocking me. The room went completely silent as they heard my aunt's voice talking about how I thought paying their mortgage made me important, followed by my uncle and cousin's cruel imitations and laughter. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. My aunt's face had gone completely white. My uncle was staring at the floor. My cousin looked like he wanted to disappear. But I wasn't finished. I played the second recording where my aunt had called me their personal ATM machine and joked about how I was probably just desperate for people to pretend to care about me. The reaction from the rest of the family was immediate and intense. My grandmother, who had been quietly listening up until that point, spoke up first. She asked my aunt and uncle if what they'd heard was really how they felt about my help. She reminded them that I had saved their house and asked how they could speak about me that way. Other family members started chiming in, expressing their shock and disappointment. One of my other uncles pointed out that I had never asked for anything in return for my help, never made them feel obligated or controlled. He said he couldn't believe they'd been mocking me behind my back while accepting my money. My aunt tried to backtrack, claiming the recordings were taken out of context, that they'd been stressed and had said things they didn't mean. My uncle attempted to minimize what they'd said, arguing that everyone vents about family sometimes, and it didn't reflect their true feelings. But the damage was done. The family had heard exactly how my aunt, uncle, and cousin really viewed my generosity. There was no way to spin it or explain it away. I stood up and addressed the room. I told them that for 2 years, I had gladly helped this family because I believed we were supporting each other through a difficult time. I had never expected gratitude or recognition, but I also hadn't expected to be mocked and ridiculed for my efforts. I explained that I had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between genuine appreciation and performance. I said I was grateful to know where I truly stood with them, because it allowed me to make informed decisions about how to invest my time and resources going forward. Then I made my announcement. I told them I would no longer be covering the mortgage payments or any other expenses for that branch of the family. I said I wished them well in finding alternative solutions, but my involvement in their financial affairs was officially over. The meeting broke up shortly after that, with various family members approaching me to express their support and apologize for what had happened. Several of them said they had no idea my aunt and uncle had been speaking about me that way, and they were disgusted by what they'd heard. Update 2. The aftermath was swift and dramatic. Within a week of the family meeting, my aunt and uncle were scrambling to figure out their mortgage situation. They reached out to other family members asking for help, but everyone was still processing what they'd learned about how my aunt and uncle had treated me. My cousin called me several times, leaving voicemails that progressed from defensive to apologetic to desperate. In his messages, he tried to explain that he'd just been going along with his parents' comments, that he didn't really feel that way about me. He begged me to reconsider helping his family, saying his younger siblings would suffer if they lost the house. I didn't respond to his calls. The time for explanations and apologies had passed. My aunt sent me a long text message admitting that what they'd said was wrong and hurtful. She claimed they'd been under a lot of stress and had taken their frustrations out on me unfairly. She promised it would never happen again if I would just give them another chance. She reminded me that her younger children, who were still in high school, had nothing to do with what had happened and didn't deserve to lose their home. My uncle took a different approach. He showed up at my workplace one day, waiting in the parking lot to ambush me as I left. He was angry and desperate, alternating between trying to guilt me and trying to intimidate me. He accused me of being vindictive and petty, of punishing innocent children for their parents' mistakes. He said I was destroying his family over some stupid comments that didn't mean anything. I told him that his family's financial situation was no longer my responsibility and that he needed to find other solutions. I reminded him that I had helped them voluntarily for 2 years, and I was ending that help voluntarily as well. I suggested he focus his energy on finding employment rather than harassing me. The conversation got heated, and I had to call security to have him removed from the property. That incident made it clear that my decision to cut ties was the right one. If this was how they treated someone who had helped them, I could only imagine how they'd behave towards someone who crossed them in other ways. Meanwhile, word had spread through the extended family about what had really happened. My grandmother called me to express her support and apologize for her daughter's behavior. She said she was ashamed of how my aunt and uncle had treated me and understood completely why I couldn't continue helping them. Other family members reached out as well, many of them sharing their own stories about times when my aunt and uncle had made disparaging comments about people who had helped them. It became clear that this pattern of behavior wasn't specific to me. They had a habit of biting the hand that fed them. 3 weeks after I stopped the mortgage payments, they received an official notice of foreclosure proceedings. The bank was moving forward with repossessing the house. My aunt called me one final time, sobbing and begging me to reconsider. She said she'd do anything to make things right, that she'd publicly apologize to the whole family, that they'd pay me back every penny I'd given them. I listened to her pleas without interrupting. When she finished, I told her that this situation wasn't really about the money or even about the hurtful comments. It was about respect and basic human decency. I explained that I couldn't maintain a relationship with people who viewed my kindness as weakness and my generosity as something to mock. I told her that I hoped they would find a way to keep their house, but it wouldn't be through my continued financial support. I wished her and her family well, but made it clear that our relationship was permanently changed. She hung up on me, and that was the last direct communication we had. Update 3. 6 weeks after I stopped making their mortgage payments, my aunt and uncle lost the house. They'd tried desperately to secure alternative financing or find family members willing to help, but nothing materialized quickly enough to stop the foreclosure process. They ended up moving into a smaller rental property across town. My uncle finally found part-time work at a hardware store, and my aunt increased her hours at the clinic. My cousin had to transfer to a less expensive college and take out additional student loans to cover the difference. The impact on the broader family dynamics was significant and lasting. The annual family reunions became awkward affairs, with clear divisions between those who supported my decision and those who thought I had been too harsh. Several family members stopped attending altogether to avoid the tension. My grandmother, who had initially supported me, eventually tried to play peacemaker. She suggested that enough time had passed and that maybe it was time to forgive and move forward. She reminded me that family relationships were more important than money or hurt feelings. I appreciated her perspective, but I explained to her that this wasn't about holding grudges or refusing to forgive. It was about learning to recognize people's true character and making decisions based on that knowledge. I told her that I had forgiven my aunt and uncle, but forgiveness didn't mean I had to restore the same level of trust and involvement in their lives. The most interesting development was how this situation affected my relationships with other family members. Several cousins and relatives who had previously taken me for granted began treating me with more genuine respect and appreciation. They seemed to realize that kindness and generosity weren't things to be expected or mocked, but rather gifts that could be withdrawn if not properly valued. One of my other uncles, who had witnessed the entire situation unfold, asked me for advice when he ran into financial difficulties several months later. Instead of simply asking for money, he came to me with a detailed plan for how he would use any assistance and how he intended to pay it back. He made it clear that he respected my position and understood that any help would be a privilege, not a right. I did end up helping him, but with clear boundaries and expectations that we both agreed to in writing. The relationship felt much more honest and sustainable because it was built on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. Looking back now, almost a year later, I have no regrets about my decision. The financial cost of helping my aunt and uncle had been significant, but the emotional cost of maintaining relationships with people who secretly despised me would have been far greater. I learned that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is stop enabling people's disrespectful behavior. By continuing to pay their mortgage after learning how they really felt about me, I would have been teaching them that their treatment of me was acceptable and had no consequences. The situation also taught me to pay closer attention to how people talk about others who help them. If someone consistently speaks negatively about their benefactors, it's probably a good indication of how they'll eventually speak about you. My aunt and uncle's financial situation has stabilized somewhat in their new living arrangement, though they're clearly not as comfortable as they were when I was covering their mortgage. My cousin graduated from his new college and found a job, though he's dealing with significantly more student debt than he would have had originally. We occasionally see each other at family gatherings, and the interactions are polite but distant. There's no animosity from my side, but there's also no warmth or trust. They seem to understand that the relationship has permanently changed and that any chance of returning to our previous dynamic is gone. The whole experience reinforced my belief that true generosity comes from a place of choice and joy, not obligation or guilt. When someone makes you feel foolish for your kindness, they're telling you something important about their character. The wise response is to listen to that message and adjust your behavior accordingly. I still help family members when they need it, but I'm much more careful about establishing clear expectations and boundaries. I've learned that protecting your own emotional well-being isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining healthy relationships with the people who truly value and respect you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling someone's worst impulses, even if it means they have to face some difficult consequences. In the end, everyone involved learned valuable lessons about respect, gratitude, and the true meaning of family support.